Welcome to Food Travel Talk TV, a monthly talk show brought to you by the World Food Travel Association, the world's leading authority on food and beverage tourism. Food Travel Talk TV was created by and for the world's culinary travel trade. Its goal is to inspire us all with ways to help us do business better. Each month, we invite industry thought leaders, opinion makers, and trendsetters to discuss important topics for our industry's benefit. My name is Eric Wolf, and I'll be your host today for our September 2020 episode. This month's topic is Cultivating Respect in Business Today. And I'd like to introduce our guest speakers. Camille Hoheb, founder of Wellness Tourism Worldwide, based outside New York City.
Hi, Eric. Thanks so much for having me today.
And Chantal Cooke, co-founder of Passion for the Planet Radio and Panpathic Communications, based in London.
Hi there.
We are using a bespoke webinar system, so Zoom rules don't apply here. Any handouts, links, and polls shared in the live sessions are for live guests only. If you're watching this recording after the air date, we're sorry, but you will not be able to access those materials. Feel free to post your questions at any time in the chat window. We will reserve the last 20 minutes or so for our guests to answer your questions. And now I'd like to set the tone for today's episode. It has probably happened to you. You send the best email ever with really useful information and the person you sent it to never replies. Or if you're a restaurant owner, several reservations were no-shows for the night. Ouch. That lost business is lost revenue. The internet was supposed to make life easier, but it seems that everything has only sped up and become more complicated, and the pandemic is wearing on our nerves even more. The consensus is that there's a lack of respect in both society and business today. So what can we do about it? So without further ado, let's get started with a poll. How many attending today think that there is a problem with respect in business dealings today? Go ahead and indicate your response in the polls area. Okay, of the answers, yes a lot, yes a little bit, or not really, 75% of people said yes a little bit, and 25% said yes a lot. Great. So thank you for sharing your opinions there. So I'd like to start the first question today to whoever would like to take it first. We have agreed that there's a challenge with respect today. What's the root of that challenge, do you think?
I think there are three things that are impacting the idea of respect and civility. I think the first is social media. The second is media, the news media in general. And I think third is politics in general. I think those three things contribute significantly to discussions and issues related to lack of respect or an erosion of respect.
Okay, very interesting. Media, social media, and politics.
Mm-hmm.
Chantal, what do you think?
I agree. I think they are making a difference. And I think our politics, both in the US and the UK, are definitely not contributing to that. And I think part of the reason, are definitely contributing to the lack of respect, I should say. And I think part of the reason for that is because it's like our social contract has been broken. There used to be a social contract that, you know, our government would look after us or look out for us or would do the right thing for us or whatever. And that doesn't really happen anymore, and that our politicians would behave in a particular way, and they don't really do that anymore. So I think our social contract is broken, and when the social contract is broken, that's when you kind of feel, well, if the contract's broken, why am I sticking to it? You know, nobody else is. And although, you know, that's the beginning of a slippery slope, which we really shouldn't want to go down, I think that is part of what's happening, is we feel that the contract's been broken, and therefore, why should we bother? I think another part of it, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a fact. I think as well as the world gets kind of smaller in a sense, and we all travel more, but equally we move more and live in different countries and kind of knock up against each other more. I think that also causes a challenge. Now, on one level, it enables us, you would hope, to have more respect for each other because we have more understanding about the way different cultures work and different people behave and think and things like that. And they always say, you know, travel broadens your horizons. But at the same time, if you're kind of in a culture, so let's say you're in the UK, let's just say for argument's sake, and we always pride ourselves on being very polite all the time, you know, after you kind of thing. But then you get somebody who comes to live here from a different culture, and that's not the way that they operate. They have something else that they do that is polite or their way of behaving. And what that can feel like is like somehow these people are rude. Well, they're not being deliberately rude or disrespectful or unpleasant. It's just they've been brought up a different way. But I think it's very difficult to always recognize that, because you have to have an understanding of it, and also to actually take a deep breath and remember it in that moment of going, you didn't do something, kind of thing. So I think all of those are contributing to it. I don't think it's only one thing. I think it's a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Interesting. So why don't you share with us one of your examples of respect that you've personally felt in business? Camille, would you like to go first?
Sure. It's interesting. I was thinking about this, and this was when I was doing a lot of commuting back and forth between California and Arizona. And this actually is a direct example of tourism. So I was actually, it was a Friday night. I was trying to make my way back to LA, and the flight was delayed. So there, of course, was, sorry, I've got a dog in the background. There was a group of people that were starting to kind of circle around the gate agent. And over time, there was a lack of communication from the gate agent. Obviously, the gate agent didn't have the information. But at one point, I was absolutely shocked because a person got into a heated argument with the gate agent, leaned over, grabbed his tie, and started pulling him forcefully over the counter, which was shocking. And at that point, the airport police were called, and there was just, I totally moved in the opposite direction because I did not want any part of that. So I didn't see what happened. But I think that's a prime example of lack of respect.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Indeed. Chantal?
I've got so the one I had was actually very recently. I was on a flight to Mykonos, and we were obviously all, we know that we've got to do the sort of, be careful and have our masks on and all those kind of things. And to the credit, oh no, you set my dogs off. To their credit, the stewards and stewardesses on the flight were being really good about telling people, do this, make sure you sit here, be careful, put your mask on, etc. They were very good. Whereas I have to say on the flight back, they were not so kind of, strict about it. But anyway, so that's all fine. And then I hear the steward say to somebody on the seat next to me, and he says, please, could you take your feet off the flip down table, because all of these tables have been cleaned and people have to eat off them. And I was like, what kind of person puts their feet on the table? And I was already kind of like, oh, that's disgusting, And then a couple of seconds later, I hear him say to another woman, please, could you not change your baby's nappy on the seat? People have to sit on that seat. And that to me was, these two things were classic examples of a lack of respect. So we're all traveling on a flight. We're all hyper aware of hygiene and things like that. And one person decides to put their bare feet up on a table, which other people have got to use. And somebody else thinks it's perfectly appropriate to change their baby's nappy on a seat that somebody else is going to sit on. And I think that's another really good example of lack of respect for other people.
Wow, I don't know what to say to that one. Well, certainly wouldn't have to worry about removing my mask to eat anything after I saw that. Gosh. And you do hear quite a bit here about people being removed from flights. They refuse to wear their mask. And I'm just thinking, what makes you so special that the rules don't apply to you, that kind of thing. But in the resources packet for today's show, and I'm going to share this right now, is quite a few articles and videos that we have identified of things like restaurants experiencing no-shows and so on, that are really kind of shocking how people are, and I've just shared it now with everyone, how people are experiencing, restaurant owners. I mean, there was something in the news about a Michelin star restaurant where half the restaurant didn't even show one weekend. And it's hard enough for businesses to try and stay open right now, let alone half the people deciding that they can't be bothered. That's just kind of, I don't know. It's you'd think after situations like the 9/11 attacks with the World Trade Center, when people went out of their way to be more helpful, more respectful, more sensitive. And now it seems with the pandemic, we've just witnessed more panic and despair in the world, and we haven't really seen that same level of kind of respect and sensitivity. And I'm just wondering, are we heading in the wrong direction here?
I think some of that has to do with what Camille was saying, that it's about the politics and things like that at the moment. Like, we haven't had, I don't think, very strong leadership or a lot of clarity. And I think when you haven't got a lot of clarity and therefore, because let's face it, it's pretty scary anyway. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when it, all first kicked off and lockdown happened, I did sit there and think, oh my God, will I have a business at the end of this? Will I have an income stream? What about my staff? Am I going to be able to pay them? So, and I'm sure I wasn't alone in that. So it was a really, really stressful time. And when you're in a stressful time, you need strong leadership. And I haven't seen that. I certainly haven't seen it in the UK. And I think that then puts people even more at that kind of, they feel like afloat. They feel like they're not connected. They feel like they're not anchored. And therefore, you start to, you don't behave very nicely because you're stressed, not because you're necessarily a nasty person, just because it's just too much. I think that has a lot to do with that.
When you say strong leadership, are you thinking prime minister or president or ministers or mayors?
To be honest, I don't think I've seen anybody in the UK show really strong leadership. Probably out of all of them, I'm guessing that Nicola Sturgeon has done the best. Boris Johnson and someone I personally don't think has shown strong leadership. And although I don't live in the States, I don't believe Trump, from my perception of it, has shown strong leadership. So I can't actually, perhaps New Zealand has been an exception to that. I don't think I've looked at any world leader and gone, oh, wow, you've got it, kind of thing.
Well, Trump has certainly shown a strong voice, if nothing else. Camille, what do you think?
I think it's very unfortunate in the U.S. I think there's so much emotional upheaval on so many different levels that, going back to what Chantal said about people being overwhelmed, when you're overwhelmed, it's hard to have some sort of mood regulation when you're worried about your finances and you're worried about your family and you're worried about health and you're worried about the economy and you're faced with all these challenges. I think that's really tough. And I view respect. There's a part of well-being that is, there's a domain called social well-being. And social well-being has the element of respect, that you care for the other person in your community as much as you care for yourself. And I think that's something that really is worth considering, which is my well-being and your well-being are interconnected. And that goes back to mask wearing. One of the things that I saw that was really interesting in a recent article, and this was not too far away from where I live in New York, it was actually in Boston, there was an ice cream parlor, privately owned ice cream parlor, and they had this simple regulation, which was their simple rule: just order an hour in advance and wear your mask. And of course, in the ice cream parlor, there are young, like high schoolers that are working in the ice cream shop. Well, unfortunately, the patrons were being extremely abusive to these high school employees, to the point where the owner decided to close the shop permanently. It was not worth for him to have his staff abused in that manner. And I think that in and of itself is a great example of leadership, where an individual, a small mom and pop owner, took responsibility for his staff. I think power lies with the individual. You're only really responsible. You can only really be responsible for your own behavior.
Wow, that's a really powerful example. And I have heard stories like that in the news as well. But I think you're right, Camille. It does start with the individual. So we've talked about some of the unfortunate things, or maybe some of the negative aspects of this, but let's start to turn things around a little bit more to the positive. What can we do about this lack of respect that seems to be only increasing?
Well, I think, certainly with our elections coming up, we can vote, we can take responsibility individually, we can make our vote count. That would be the first thing. We could be responsible for our own actions. We can teach children to act, civilly. There could be courses or programs at the employer level on civility. You look at over the last 20 years, the number of employer shootings due to perceived lack of respect. It's an issue. It's obvious. It's this big issue. So I think there should be some sort of training at a very early age that is incorporated throughout and reinforced in a positive way throughout our experience, whether it's school, whether it's work, whether it's neighborhoods, community, elections. It's throughout our whole life cycle. It touches every area of our life. It's social well-being.
I agree. Training is kind of the obvious answer, and of course, I'd like to see that kind of thing right through school and so on. I sometimes wonder whether some of the things we teach in school are perhaps not the things that are most useful. Perhaps we should be teaching more life skill type things rather than perhaps the kind of stuff that, well, certainly I learned at school. And it's not to say those things weren't useful and interesting as well, but I do sometimes wonder whether we should have more to do with life skills and respect and politeness and manners, but also, financial skills and those sorts of things as well. So I think absolutely I agree with that. And I think the other thing, though, because that feels like it's going to take a long time, isn't it? We're not going to solve this problem quickly with that sort of training. So I think the thing that we could all do as individuals is to try and take that breath every now and again and check when we're behaving in a particular way. So I really genuinely try hard to behave in a respectful way and to treat people kind of appropriately and so on. But you know what? I don't get it right all the time. And sometimes I know I'm getting it wrong and I still do it. And I think, and I'm not proud of myself to say that. I'm just trying to be kind of, honest about it.
Human. Yeah.
But, you get yourself wound up and you're just, I'm going to sort of, say something. I'm going to be a bit passive aggressive or whatever it happens to be. And I think there's two things that you should do then, and I should do certainly then when that happens. One is clock it. Notice that you've done it and go, that wasn't very nice, was it? Let's try not to do that again. And then the other thing is, if there is an opportunity to make amends in some way, so it is possible to call that person up or to actually go back and say something, go, sorry, I really didn't mean to be like that about it, then I think we should do it. And I think if you do that, I think the clocking of it is the first thing. And then obviously the making amends is important too, not just because it kind of teaches you something, but because it does make amends. Then I think that would be a really important thing. Because I think that if you had, if there were, I bet you anything, if you went and asked some of the people where someone, whether it's me or whomever, has been rude to them, and then they've gone back and made amends, whether that's taught them something, I bet a lot of them would say that it had. And it would help them go, do you know what? It was okay to go back and make amends or to apologize or whatever. So I think absolutely I'm up for training, definitely. But I also think as individuals, it's just very kind of, you were saying in the beginning, Camille, is that, it sits with us. It does. And we should be, and I know it's, it's an overused phrase, but be the change that we want to see, do take that action.
Right. And I think there's great power. You said clocking it. The other way of phrasing it is taking a pause, just taking a pause before you respond. If people would just take a pause before they respond, it would make a huge impact. And also I agree, taking ownership of the mistake. But the first step is just take a pause before you react in a way that perhaps you wish you hadn't.
But I'm wondering, as hospitality professionals, shouldn't we be the ones trying to cultivate that respect? And someone made a comment before that it starts with a smile, simply smiling to someone. You don't even have to communicate. You don't even have to speak the same language, but just acknowledging them. Of course, some people might take that as being creepy. That's how people are today. But there was a kind of a modus operandi of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Company. I don't know if it still is, but many years ago, and before they were purchased by Marriott, the modus operandi for the staff was ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. And that whole mindset permeated how that business was run. And the Ritz-Carlton chain was was really extremely highly regarded for the service that it provided. They had a CRM system where they remembered everything from your favorite pillow type to whether or not you drank alcohol, what language you spoke. They had all of this stuff worked out, and it was truly, great attention to detail, great respect for the guest, and I think that true art of hospitality. So, should we as hospitality professionals be setting the bar here?
As a hospitality and service industry, I think it's important to set the bar to make people feel welcome. Isn't that the crux of what hospitality is all about? Making people feel welcome and comfortable, and they want to come back, and they want to re-engage with your brand. Isn't it through respect and showing that you care, that you're mindful of them, of what they want, of their needs? You're able to anticipate that in advance. That's excellent service, isn't it? If you're able to do that in a very respectful way. I think that has to go back to, what Eric was saying, which is civility. Civility and respect goes hand in hand, again, with social well-being. You're treating someone as you want to be treated. And I think that's the bottom line. It's as simple as that.
I agree, and I think it is hospitality's role to do that. Partly because that is, I say, isn't that partly what you're paying for in a sense? So I think it's right.
Yeah.
Also, if you start on that, if you open, if you like, with that, you are less likely to get a negative response in return. Now, it doesn't mean you're not going to get some idiot who's just going to be rude and unpleasant and disrespectful because that's just how they are that day for whatever reason. But you are going to, I think you're going to start off in a better way. So, if I think about, again, a recent experience of going to a restaurant, again, I'll use my Mykonos experience because obviously I haven't been traveling for a while. But we went to one restaurant and it was kind of like we had to stand around waiting before somebody, came to see us, and we kind of moved into the restaurant to sort of go, where can we sit? And we were ignored. So we then found a table, and they came over. That was fine. We placed at the beginning an order for some drinks or whatever. And then, and he said, back in a minute to take the order. And then somebody else came up and said, we need to move you off this table because we've got a reservation and we need to put you somewhere else. I'm just like, really? Okay. So we moved, but there was no, there was no apology. There was no, let me get you a glass of something. It was an apology for the fact we're having to move you or anything, or even let you pick up your glasses and move. I mean, it was just, it was unpleasantly done. And I didn't feel good about it. And both my partner and I, we kind of sat there, looked at the menu and just went, I don't want to eat here actually now. So we just said, no, just give us the bill for the drink we've had and we're going to go, which we did. We then walked a little bit further down the road, found another restaurant, and it looked a bit empty, and we kind of poked our head in and said, you're still serving food? And she kind of smiled and laughed and said, yeah, we're a restaurant. Of course we are. Come in, And then we sat down and she was really friendly and she kind of made a few jokes and we had a really nice meal there. And even so we got into the first place feeling really like, it's our last day, but we're going to have a really nice meal and we're going to sit on the beach. It's going to be great. So we weren't looking to be unpleasant, but they kind of pushed us in that direction in a sense. And yet we were in a bit of a grumpy mood when we went into the other place because of the way we'd been treated in the previous place. And she was so lovely that we ended up having these really good chats, and we did leave a fairly hefty tip. So I think that's a good example of how actually, if you start with the right attitude, you can even turn people who are perhaps a bit grumpy in the first place into somebody who's going to be your fan, who's going to write a good TripAdvisor review, which we did, and who's going to leave a substantial tip. So yes, absolutely, we have that responsibility.
So we talked about cultivating this respect with a smile. That's one way to do it. I think patience is another way to do it. Trying to be patient. And I know I'm an Aries and we are known for not being patient. I'm just telling you now. So I've had to learn patience in my life. And even today in the post office, I was trying to mail something and it took the woman 7.5 minutes to work out how to put the stamps on the envelope I was sending. And I didn't say a thing. I really, really wanted to say something, but I thought, no, she obviously needs more time to process things, and I'm just going to let her take all the time she needs. And it's frustrating, I know, but maybe patience is another way. Are there any other ways that we can cultivate this kind of respect?
Well, in the food industry, I think certainly if you're at a restaurant and there's a long line, you mentioned smile, but even, quick eye contact or acknowledgement. I know you're waiting. I'll be with you in just a second. You see that all the time in the service industry where you're left waiting and you're wondering, did they see me? You don't want to also be bullish and, I'm here. But I think the simple act of just acknowledgement, yes, I'll be with you in just a moment, as soon as I can, goes a long way. People are very irritated with having to wait and feel like they're not being seen.
I think that's so true. The number of times I've kind of felt like, fine, I'll go then. If you can't see me and I'm invisible, kind of thing is going on in your head. So I absolutely 100% agree with that. And I think that also goes back to in the travel industry in general, like your example, Camille, at the airport. Yes, there's no excuse for the guy leaning over and grabbing the other guy by the tie. But at the same time, if there's a lack of information, it's human nature. You build up something in your head, don't you? You kind of get yourself all stressed. Whereas if they literally, even if the information is, we don't have any new information at the moment. The information we gave you previously, that there's a delay of about an hour or whatever it is all we've got at the moment, but we will keep you informed as soon as we hear any more. Even that is information. Even that makes me feel like, okay, you haven't forgotten about us. We're not all sitting in this airport lounge, wondering what's going to happen, and we'll still be here in a year's time, kind of idea. So I think what you say is right, that acknowledgement, but equally in other situations, it's just let us know. Just give us some information. The train's delayed because, the check-in is slower because, all these kind of things. Just let us know and then come back and tell us again. Don't assume because you said it once that's enough, and then an hour later I'll be happy with that once. I'm not going to be. So I think, yeah, I agree. It's the acknowledgement and the communication. It would go a long way to helping.
Mm-hmm.
I think that acknowledgement one is really powerful, and that's great on whichever of you came up with that first, I forget. But I think we've all been in the restaurant before where you go in, you're waiting for your table, and no one comes to greet you for several minutes. And I have a 60-second rule. I walk into a restaurant. If I don't get someone speaks to me in 60 seconds, I start to get a little nervous and antsy. And I understand when businesses are busy, but this is their job, right? There should be a host or hostess there welcoming people, informing you, acknowledging you, right? And I've seen this handled really well so I'm not going to use the excuse that we're all busy. That doesn't fly, because I have seen in hotels where I'm waiting to check in, and clearly it's a busy day at the hotel and things are not going as fast as I would like them to because I'm in impatient Aries. However, what they have done is they've brought someone goes out with glasses of water with lemon in it, right? And says, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's taking longer to check in. Would you like a glass of water?" How gracious is that? It costs the hotel literally nothing to do that, but it has taken the stress level and my propensity to want to attack down several notches. And what a great way to handle that.
Yeah, I'd like to see more of that, definitely, or more of that type of thing, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Another thing too is, I go back to, when my mom was alive and she was becoming more infirm, not able to walk very well, and how important it was for me on the end, if we were going anywhere, to exactly know what the parking situation was, know the distance of the walkway to the entrance, know about the seating arrangements. She could not sit in a tall seat. She couldn't sit in there's certain seating arrangements that would work and that would not work. And it was a lot of work on the front end, but it was so meaningful for us to get out. And there was one particular instance that stood out in my mind in Albany, New York, a restaurant that had just opened. It was in the dead of winter. It was very icy. We wanted to get out. We wanted to try this restaurant, and how the owner, who was 8 months pregnant, took so much care with my mother, and what an indelible impression that made, a positive impression that someone was actually being so mindful and so caring. And this restaurant was full of, at the time my mom was 89, hip, young, 20 and 30-year-olds who, were just having a great time at the bar and restaurant. And here comes in, on a cane, an 89-year-old woman struggling to walk through the door. I just felt like that experience with the restaurant was so such a stellar example of caring for your clientele, no matter who they are, what their abilities are, what their age is. It really struck me very strongly.
Indeed. I'd like to revisit this idea of training and education, especially from an early age. But right now, I'd like to ask you if you think respect is in any way at all related to integrity. So as a person, you have respect. Does that mean you have integrity? Or if you don't have respect, does it mean you lack some degree of integrity?
I suppose it depends whether your integrity includes, or your sense of your own integrity includes, treating other people with respect. So if I think about what I would, I suppose in a way it's who do I define myself as? Because my integrity is part of who I define myself as. So I might feel that actually, if I behave with integrity, it's absolutely fine to pay my bills late. That might be acceptable to me as part of my integrity. It's not, as it happens. I think it's very important to pay your bills on time and to pay people properly for the work that they do. So I suppose it depends on whether I define that as part of it. Personally, yes, I do. I think treating anything that's living actually with respect is very, very much ingrained into what I believe is who I am and how I want to behave with integrity. But perhaps that's not the same for everybody else.
Yeah, I think they go hand in hand. I think it's all about good stewardship. Treat others as you want to be treated, and also sentient beings. Be respectful of all forms of life. Simple.
So how do you both work to cultivate mutual respect in your personal and business relationships? What do you personally do?
Do you want to take that one first?
Sure. I think that's a great question. I go back to the golden rule: do unto others as you would like to be treated. Right? It's kind of like figuring out. I think listening, really deeply listening to someone is important. Taking that pause and responding. I think being fully mindful, being fully aware. There's a lot of I think a lot of conversations take place today where people are multitasking. I can hear it on the phone, and you can probably hear it. You've probably experienced this too. You're talking to someone and they're multitasking. Are they really listening, or are they kind of like So I think listening skills, I think that's the first thing. I think encouraging others is really important. When someone has something to celebrate, I think it's great to honor that, to acknowledge that, to help them celebrate. And if you can be helpful, I think that's also important too. I mean, again, these are not science, but just being a good person.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of those. And I think the other thing I like, and I expect you haven't mentioned this only because you didn't, there's lots of other things to talk about, is I think it's about being upfront. So I like to be clear about, this is what I can do for you and this is what I can't. And this is what I'm willing to do and this is what I'm not, kind of thing. Because I think too often and I know it's kind of, again, it's an old trope, but it's that kind of, we overpromise but underdeliver. And we overpromise not because we're trying to be, funny about it or whatever, but because we kind of go, because in a sense we're not clear. And therefore the other person assumes certain things because we haven't been clear. And I think it's my responsibility as a business owner to be clear. And so that there can be no misunderstanding. And it doesn't alleviate that problem all the time, but it certainly helps if you have a lot of clarity up front. So I think one of the ways I try to do it is to be clear all the time, along with the other things that Camille has also said, because I completely agree with that as well. And then the other thing is to be kind of true to myself. And by that, what I mean is, if I have a client, and I've had actually 2 clients this year that I've ended up sacking as clients because they would not treat me or my staff appropriately, or what I deem to be appropriate. And in the end, a bit like the example you gave of the ice cream parlor, you come to a point where you go, I don't care how much you want to pay me. I'm not going to put up with that because that's not appropriate. And I think that's another thing, is that you have to remember that you do not have to put up with this. And if someone will not, and you've tried your best perhaps to explain to them or to, to highlight the issue or whatever you think is appropriate yourself, and they will not kind of, do what's right, then you know what? You have every right to turn around and say, I don't want to work with you anymore. And I really recognize that that's easier to do when you've got plenty of work. I get it. If you're really struggling for work, you will probably put up with more stuff, as it were, than if you're lucky like I am, where I've got lots of work. But I still think sometimes it's amazing how powerful it is for your own self-esteem and your own sense of kind of your own confidence as well, to actually turn around and go, do you know what? I might not have a lot of work right now, and it might mean that I'm going to struggle a little bit this month, but you are not worth it. And I think that's something that's very powerful to do as well.
Fire your client for customers. I love it. Okay. I'm gonna ask the audience for questions. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask our illustrious speakers, please do so. And while you're thinking of your questions, I'd like to draw your attention to our upcoming 3 summits that are taking place next month and in November. We have our Research Summit, our Innovation Summit, and our Food Trucks North America Summit. So just click on the pop-up there, and it'll take you to the event page on our website, and you can read more about it. So let's have a look at any questions or comments that have come in. Let's see. So there have been a couple of comments about training here. And let's see. Has anyone approached the school districts to talk about and start these how to be hospitable classes? And then we had talked earlier in the show as well about how to start more of a training or education about this at an earlier age. I mean, it can be done in the schools, or it can be done at home with the family. How do we train people to be more respectful? How can we inculcate that from such an early age that becomes the makeup of someone by the time they're a young adult?
I've seen in the wellness space that now there are meditation classes that are given in classrooms. And the purpose of the meditation classes are to engender and cultivate a feeling of calm, of understanding, different emotions, and to help with mood regulation. So that is one thing, is meditation classes could be very helpful.
I think those sort of things help as well, because they, like you were saying right at the beginning about, they give you that opportunity to take a breath, take a pause, kind of before you react. And I think so. I would say that's a good piece of training. And then I think the other one is perhaps I think people are not very. I think some people find communication quite difficult for whatever reason that is, and perhaps training around communication would be helpful too, because sometimes if the communication is poor, it can be misinterpreted, and then that can lead to kind of an escalation almost as well. So I think communication, both in clarity, but also in understanding that more communication sometimes, well, almost always, is better than less, is probably another type of training that I think would help. Yeah. And again, starting young.
Mm-hmm. And then in terms of professional training, last year it was really interesting. I decided to take a Dale Carnegie course. It was an 8-week course with other professionals, and I found that course to be extremely interesting. It was helpful. Again, it's not rocket science, but it's a good reminder on a lot of life lessons that everyone should know and practice.
I think as individuals, we have a responsibility, as you've done, to kind of think about our own continuing personal development. So not to assume that, oh God, look at me, I'm so long in the tooth now, I kind of know it all, I don't need to do any more training courses. And I find myself thinking that sometimes, it's like, oh God, not another one, do I really have to? But actually, you always get something from it. And even if there's things where you think, well, I kind of know all that, don't I? The number of times you go, yeah, I did know that, and I'd completely forgotten. So yeah, I think as individuals, we have a responsibility to keep developing ourselves and keep learning. And I would like to think that as employers that we would put some investment and some kind of emphasis on that as well, to recognize the importance. But you know what, if your employer isn't, then maybe it's time either to hassle him or her, or to take it your responsibility yourself and just go, well, you know what, it's for me. I get the benefit from this, so I'm going to put my time and effort into it.
And also, I think maybe looking at school curricula, I've always said that I don't think school really prepares people for life. You know, it'll teach you mathematics, and it'll teach you science, and it'll teach you about your language and things like that. But like you said, Chantal, communication, improved communication. And I've always thought that we should be taught how to sell an idea, how to do sales, basically, because even if you don't have the sales gene, even if you don't enter the sales profession, you have to sell yourself at a job interview. You have to sell an idea to a project manager or a client. You're selling all the time without realizing it. And how exactly do we do that? Or helping people to overcome insecurity, the fear of rejection as well. Not everyone is cut out to be a public speaker or even a leader for that matter, but that's okay. We can still give you these top 3 things that will help you kind of get by when you need to. And I just don't think that school curricula today teach enough of those kinds of skills that really can make us be better humans.
I agree.
Me too. Yes.
So what do we do about that? Do you contact your ministers? Are they going to listen? Do they care? Contact the school district, Camille?
Well, I think there's different points of intersection. So I think some of this responsibility definitely falls within family. You know, the family unit. I think the family unit has changed significantly since, since when I was growing up. So let's take a look at family. Let's take a look at schools. Let's take a look at churches and places of worship. There's lots of places. Again, it's I don't think all the responsibility falls on the school. I think the responsibility is shared in a lot of different organizations and formats and communities, just as I mentioned. I think it's a good starting point to have these types of programs in schools, but it has to be reinforced within the environment. It has to be a part of family life. It has to be part of community life. It has to be part of, multiple areas of your life. It can't just be one small area. Otherwise, I don't think it'll hold. It's the entire environment. You have to look at the entire ecosystem and all the parts of that ecosystem.
I completely agree, you do, because just going to one class or having one place and the rest, one thing that tells you it's this and everything else that tells you it's that's not consistent. That's not going to work. So I completely agree. And I think the other thing is that we try and create, often what happens when especially government run training programs and things, or kind of like big initiatives, is we try and far too much to do a one size fits all. And I think that doesn't really work. You want to really help somebody. Sometimes that requires a bit of one-to-one time in a much smaller group to really understand that person and to kind of let them know that they've been seen and heard and understood and so on, and also just basically to understand them as well. So I think we would actually, when you think about some of these massive initiatives and the millions that are spent on them, I do wonder, or billions even, I do wonder actually if we kind of said, well, let's get, I don't know, let's take that budget and train up 10 people or something. Maybe that's all we can afford with that budget, but we'll train up 10 people, and for a year they will each have, I don't know, a person a month, or 12 people over a year, or whatever it is, but they will work closely with them. They'll coach them through that. They'll help them through it. They'll build their self-confidence, those kind of things. I think that would be so much more powerful. And I bet in the long run, okay, I'm not an economist and I haven't done the maths, but honestly, I am pretty sure in the long run, you'd get better results and it would be cheaper if you did it that way, rather than trying to do these massive kind of, let's shove them all in a room, let's tick all these boxes type initiatives that seem to be very common these days.
To add on, I thought it was really interesting. I did a little getting some back. There we go. I did a little research, and I saw that France at one point, I think it was like 7 years ago, had their tourism board had a politeness manual that they that they were working with their stakeholders to enhance the reputation of their destination. And I'm not sure really how that worked out, to be honest with you, because I think TripAdvisor says like one of the unfriendliest places to visit. And I was just visiting with one of my friends over the weekend, and we were talking about wanting to travel again. And she had mentioned wanting to go back to the UK. She can't wait to go back to the UK, and how she will never go back to France because of the way she was treated.
It's all just a misunderstanding, I'm sure.
Right. So it's interesting to see, if programs are rolled out, their effectiveness. And then, I also saw that I noticed in Japan, in Kyoto, I think it was the government that rolled out a program just last year. It was on an app to try to help teach tourists to be more respectful of their culture, i.e., not taking pictures of geisha without permission, and and other things, so that the host country, the residents of the host country, and the tourists weren't, at odds.
Clashing, yeah.
Yeah, they weren't clashing. So I'm not aware of any other programs, maybe Chantal or Eric, maybe you are, at a tourism level in terms of trying to train respect and civility and,
Well, there's the superhost programs that have been around for quite a long time, and that's more about teaching customer service. But customer service is, I think respect is just one part of customer service, and I don't know that it's a big focus of it. But Chantal, I really like what you said about preventing the staff turnovers, and I think I have seen studies, and this is years ago, and I can't cite one at the top of my head, but studies showing that the more staff is trained and educated and valued, the less turnover you'll have, and the less it costs the business. By the time you have to train a new employee to ramp up and get to where the old employee was, you've lost 9 months of a year. And Camille, I really want to touch on something that you said about places of worship. And I'm going to go there because that's what I do. But I think back to, we're all of a similar age, and think back to when we were less than 10 years old. And whether it was going to church on Sunday or synagogue or to a mosque or whatever your family did, that was something that was done when we were young. And now, fast forward to 2020, I would be hard pressed to find anyone who attends church or synagogue on a regular basis. Maybe synagogue more. I have some Jewish friends back in Portland, and I think that they often went to synagogue. But maybe we have lost some of those values because people are attending places of worship less.
Okay, so that also reminds me about the article, Eric, that I shared with you from the Wall Street Journal about, it was written just last week or the week before, with this basically this the spirit of respect and civility being lost. So in the Christian faith, or like in the Catholic Church, there's this phrase, "Peace be with you," and you turn to your fellow, churchgoers, and you shake their hand, or you whatever, some sort of gesture of giving peace to the other person, of goodwill. This article was interesting, and it said, what if instead of not acknowledging the other person, or being indifferent to the other person, what if there was a culture of extending some sort of peace greeting? And I thought that was really interesting. And there are in some cultures, there aren't in other cultures, but reaching out with the idea, with the expectation that other person is going to reciprocate in kind, gives a positive feeling, as opposed to shunning them, or or being indifferent, or being neutral. If you have this, if you think in terms of a positive way, you most likely will get a positive response back, right? Kind of like the idea that you had, or the training that you mentioned, Eric, about the Ritz-Carlton, smile at the guest and they'll probably smile back at you. Simple things, simple things that can make a difference in the way that we treat each other.
Chantal, any thoughts about places of worship and their influence?
I think to me, the places of worship are more about that they were a place where the community met rather than the religion that was associated with it per se. And I think we have much less of that sense of meeting up as a community. And when you when you don't know the people around you, don't know your neighbours, it's quite easy then to kind of block yourself off, and it's like you can't see them, and they're not real. They're not human in the same way. So I think for me, it's less about it being a place of worship per se. As I say, it's about it being a place where the community congregated together. And that's something I think it's a shame that we don't have that. And it's something that I've noticed having moved out of London and moved to a very small rural community. There's quite a difference there. It's like I don't know everybody that lives around me, not by any stretch. And of course, and you know, I've come into contact with some people I really hope I don't come into contact with again. But at the same time, there is definitely more of a sense of getting to know each other and helping each other out and looking out for each other a bit more. But of course, that's easier when you live in a much smaller community than it is when you live, you know, in the centre of London, as you know, outskirts of London, as I did before. So that it still can be found. But I think it's a real shame that, you know, I know my neighbours now in a way that I didn't know and I've only lived there 2 years, in a way that I didn't know my neighbours in the house that I lived in London for the last 15 years. And I think that's a real shame.
Chantal, I share your experience. I moved from LA after living there for 25 years to upstate New York. And I was just sharing with one of my friends here, you know, how happy I am with my move. And she was asking, you know, what's the main difference? And I said, I think in LA, everyone competes for resources. And because you're competing for resources, it's this competition. And also there's this transience. You may never see this person again, therefore, you know, as opposed to a community where you know your neighbors and you know, you're all in it together. It's a very different feel.
It is, yeah.
Interesting. Well, before we start to wind down for the day, I'd like to let everyone know that both of you lovely ladies have appeared on our podcast show before. So if anyone would like to get to know Chantal or Camille better, I invite you to visit our podcast page where you can listen to their podcast, or you can simply go to any podcast player and type in Eat Well, Travel Better, and the podcast will come up for you. And also, before we take our last comment or question, if people would like to get in touch with you, what is the best way? Camille?
You know, there's several ways, through LinkedIn, through Wellness Tourism Worldwide's Facebook page, or you can simply email me. My email is camille@wellnesstourismworldwide.com.
Great, thank you. And Chantal?
Likewise, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'm on all of them. And also via the website, which is Passion for the Planet, all words, passionfortheplanet.com.
And you have a radio station there as well.
We do.
Yes. Very interesting one too. All right. So what would be your top recommendation for action for our attendees today to take away?
Do you want me to go first, Chantal?
Yeah, go on.
I think the biggest takeaway, or the most helpful takeaway, is to take a pause. Don't let the small things, try not to let the small things get to you. Because if you can take this small action, the benefit to you and to the others around you is it'll be more peaceful, more calm, sense of kind of more caring, and probably much more productive. So you're creating a happier and healthier environment for yourself and for others. And I think that would be just that small takeaway. Just take a pause and stop letting small things get to you. Don't let them accumulate. Yeah.
Some of the basic tenets of wellness tourism and applying them here.
Yeah.
Very much so. Chantal?
I think I would say it is behave the way you want to be sort of behaved towards, so to speak. So, you know, if you want people to smile at you, smile at them. If you want to be paid on time, pay them on time. You know, if you think someone deserves a thank you and you feel you want to be thanked for your work, well, thank other people for their work. So I think it's behave the way you would like to see the rest of the world behave as much as you possibly can.
What do they say? Is it treat others do unto others as they would do unto you, or something.
You would wish them to do unto
That
you.
whole phrase, yes.
Or the Gandhi thing of, be the change you want to see. Either way you want to phrase it, it amounts to the same thing. Take action yourself, and I think you'll see if you can change yourself, which of course is easier if you do what Camille was just saying, which is take that moment, take a breath. I think the two things actually work quite well together. Then I think we could see a big change by taking those two things and using them to, because if each one of us was a better person and more respectful, well, that would solve the problem, wouldn't it? It would all be sorted.
Well, you both quoted a couple people, and I tried to quickly find a quote from one of my favorite thinkers and orators, Maya Angelou, and I couldn't come up with one quickly, but you've inspired me to now go to search for some quotes from her, because I'm sure she's commented on this before. Very smart woman, a real inspirational woman as well. So I'd like to thank you both for taking the time today. You're two of my favorite people on the whole planet. And I love everything you have to say. I love your minds. You're beautiful people in and out. And thank you again for really caring and having the respect to share your knowledge with our industry today. Thank you both very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone. So next month, our show is scheduled for the 13th of October. And the topic is going to be keeping authenticity authentic on Tuesday, October 13th, same time. So we'll see you then. Thank you all. Bye-bye.